What was your goal in writing the book?
Well, when I worked for Bobby Kennedy as an environmental lawyer, I was working full-time on issues related to animal agriculture, and specifically the pollution from confined animal agriculture. And I was amazed, first of all, at how little I knew about it when I started the work, and my eyes were really opened as I was visiting farms around the country and as I was doing research. And I was also struck repeatedly by, as I would talk with people, whether it was my relatives or friends or just acquaintances about my own work, they were completely in the dark about it as well. So I was sort of repeatedly reminded that very few people know very much about where their food comes from, and especially about where their animal-based food comes from. And in fact, a lot of people have, I'd say probably more than the majority of people, seem to have a misconception about where their food comes from. They kind of think that their food is coming from a place like this. And in fact, only a very small percentage of the food in the country is produced at places like this. And the vast majority of animal-based foods are produced in total confinement, metal buildings, what I would refer to as a factory farm. And so I felt that I needed to somehow figure out a way to speak to people about how their food was produced. And I wanted to try to do it in a way that it was non-threatening, it was approachable and easy to digest, so to speak. And so I came up with the idea of talking about the way farm animals are raised in this country, but doing it in a memoir form. And that's when I came up with the idea for Righteous Porkchop.
And what are the biggest issues there are many issues that you uncover in the book that I know my eyes were very opened as well. And as we were talking earlier, I'm a 23-year vegetarian, and there were many things in the book that I had no idea about. Can you highlight maybe just a couple things in your book that when you were doing the research were very surprising to you or eye-opening to you?
Well,
on the factory farms.
Let's see. I guess, one thing that was astonishing to me, especially as a vegetarian, was the way laying hens live, egg-laying hens. So I started first encountering this when I was an environmental lawyer at Waterkeeper Alliance, and I got inquiries from people who lived in communities with egg-laying operations, and they were very concerned about what was happening in their community as far as water pollution and as far as odor, because these tend to be very stinky places. And when I was all these years being a vegetarian, I was eating eggs, and I was thinking that I was okay. I wasn't contributing to factory farming because I wasn't buying meat. And in fact, I found out that egg-laying operations are probably some of the worst, or they can be, I should say, some of the worst places. The animals lived in extremely cramped conditions. Many of them liquefy their manure, so they have these huge pools of basically liquefied manure that is extremely stinky and is a huge problem for flies. There's a tremendous issue with flies in the communities of where these egg-laying operations are. And the conditions in which the animals live are so abysmal. They're in very cramped conditions. They often live, in fact, they pretty much always live in these operations stacked up on one another. So they're actually pooping on top of each other. They're getting pooped on, many of them all day long. And then the most shocking thing was to find out that there's no humane slaughter standard for these birds. And so these hens, after living in these abysmal conditions their whole lives, they're actually vacuumed up while still alive. And then just basically typically they're just thrown into sort of a chopping operation, none of which is done while they're in any way euthanized or they're not in any way rendered unconscious. This is all happening while they're alive and conscious. So I was really shocked at the conditions that egg-laying hens are that they experience for their entire lives. And not quite as shocking, but also very troubling was what I learned about dairies, because I was also a dairy eater, and I still am. I also thought that by not eating meat, dairy was okay, I was thinking. And I didn't know that actually dairies can be some of the most unpleasant places for animals. and also just like with the hens, where the animals in many cases are continually confined. In the case of the dairy cows, they're standing on concrete their whole lives, and it's just a very unpleasant life for a cow that's really meant to be out on grass at a place like this, and is meant to be moving and eating grass. And in fact, they're put in a confinement dairy. They're never eating grass. They're really never out of pasture. They're not exercising, and they're standing on a very hard surface their entire lives. Some of them get to be on a rubber pad part of the time, but basically, I just found the conditions of dairy and egg operations very surprising and unpleasant for me, because I was eating those foods and was thinking that was okay. Had to change my eating habits.